Welcome back, everyone. It is John Pollock with you, and joined here in studio. I was working all week to nail down this guy's title, the Executive Vice President and General Manager of the UFC's operations in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Did I nail it, Tom?
You nailed it, John. Well done.
Do you have one of those accordion business cards?
No, but I'm actually hoping for all the Commonwealth countries where they make good wine.
So
I'm actually lobbying for South Africa.
You know, for the UFC talking about getting into all these countries, clearly, you want to be overseeing all of these countries. There's so much to discuss. Obviously, it is a promotional time for UFC 206, Saturday, December the 10th in Toronto. It's been 3 years since the UFC has hosted a show in Toronto. Why now, and what necessitated this return to Toronto? Obviously, this was on the agenda, but why is it occurring now?
Well, we've wanted to come back to Toronto for a long time, as you know, John, and actually this time last year we knew we put this date in the calendar when we were doing 2016 planning. So this has been in the works for a long time. We had an earlier fight, as you recall, that was scheduled for Toronto that we had to postpone, which we did, and we always wanted to come back here. This will be our 5th trip to Toronto. The only city that we've been to more times than that is dans la belle Provence in Montreal, and the Air Canada Centre is going to be witness for the 4th time, UFC 206, so it's going to be exciting.
How would you characterize this year in the country, holding a card in Ottawa, getting back to Vancouver, and now Toronto as well for a big pay-per-view? Do you feel that this has been a step forward in 2016?
Yeah, no, it's been a terrific year for us. And that was following up on 2015, which was a really strong year as well. Last year we set the overall record, I think, for revenue for the UFC as a total business globally in 2015, and we're beating those numbers this year. So it's exciting to be finishing our calendar of the events that we're responsible for here out of the Toronto office. With UFC 206, we've got Fight Night Melbourne, which is happening on US Thanksgiving on Sunday, the 27th of November. So that'll be the second last fight that I and my team are responsible for. So we'll close out the year in strong fashion, featuring the light heavyweights.
You're going to be off in Australia, and you're going to miss the Grey Cup here in the city.
Oh, I know, and it's really I was going to say pissing off, but those are bad language, so I won't say that. It's really upsetting my daughter, who she's always my Grey Cup partner, and so I said, she came and said, Dad, are we, the Grey Cup's here in Toronto, are you going to go? When are we going? We've got your tickets. And I said, no, unfortunately I'm going to be in Melbourne. So, but that's not such a bad place to be.
What are the differences? It's one thing when you'll go to a place like Saskatoon where they just are so starved for combat sports and big live entertainment. In Toronto, this is a pretty packed calendar. We mentioned the Grey Cup, the World Juniors at the end of December. This is a city where there's always big events. That's always your competition.
Yeah.
Is it a different strategy when obviously you're in a major market like Toronto in Canada?
Well, I think major markets like Toronto are used to hosting multiple events. Obviously the Blue Jays are in a race right now, even though they're down.
TikTok, Tom.
TikTok, yeah, I know. Don't hurt me with that, John. But you didn't even mention it's the Leafs 100th season, the Winter Classic, World Cup of Hockey was just here. There's this team called the Raptors. TFC is about to go to the playoffs. But that happens in New York, that happens in LA, that happens in Chicago. So I think when you're a world-class city and you're a world-class sports town, you expect to have these kinds of circumstances. And frankly, I think it just helps to solidify the fact that this is a great sports town and that the UFC can come in here in the midst of all of the activities and thrive. And we have every expectation the Air Canada Centre is going to be a busy and a loud place on December the 10th.
Well, let's get the major topic out there, and that is George St-Pierre. He stated that he is now a free agent. The UFC disagrees with that categorization. From your standpoint here, that expectation was out there that George St-Pierre would be on this card. I guess, what is your reaction to this story? And also, taking that audience expectation, there's no replacing a George St-Pierre for a major Canadian card. George St-Pierre to me is a global star, not just Canadian. And that's certainly one of the difficulties this event faces.
Sure. Well, listen, John. As you well know, I'm not a lawyer, but at the same time, I'm also one of those guys that I never count my chickens until they're hatched. So while you can have all these conversations about this fight might happen, this person might be here, what's going to happen, I don't put a lot of weight into any of those things until such a time as there's an official announcement. And I've seen signed bout agreements coming back. And so I just waited until I heard those things. But, and you also know I'm not a lawyer, but I can tell you one thing, that George remains under an agreement with us. That's with Zuffa LLC and our parent company, and we have every intention of fulfilling all of our obligations under that agreement, and we'll do whatever is required to ensure that George does the same, and until such a time as anything differs, then that's our position.
Have you had any contact with George recently?
Not recently. I haven't spoken to George, and you know what? I speak to George on occasion. Actually had a great meeting with him regarding USADA and with Jeff Nowitzki back in Montreal a while ago. And I speak with his representatives on occasion too, typically on sort of ongoing business kind of things. But when it comes to contract negotiations, I leave that up to Dana, Joe Silva, our matchmakers, and our legal team in Vegas, because that's where it should be. You want that centralized, and they're the guys that deal with that stuff.
Going to the ownership picture and the massive sale that occurred this past summer, it's always going to affect people very differently. From your perspective, I mean, what has this change been like? Have you had any contact with new people placed in power on the ownership side? And I mean, just from your standpoint, you come into this organization in 2010, and then a $4 billion figure is the reported sale price. I mean, you must have had a jaw-dropping moment at some point in all of this.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. It just shows you what happens when entrepreneurs take some risks. And let's face it, Lorenzo and Frank and Fertitta took some risks, and those risks obviously paid off. And I've reached out and I've met with my counterparts of the team that acquired us, IMG WME, here in Toronto, Sydney, and in Melbourne, and I've had good conversations with them. I mean, in the end, I think this is all about leveraging their networks and their capacities within the sports and entertainment business, not just in North America, but around the world. They're really well entrenched in Asia. They've got strong, deep roots throughout Europe and Eastern Europe, and I think it's a growth play. It's too early to say exactly how these things will affect the day-to-day operations of people like myself and our team here in Canada, but those decisions will be made in time, and we'll roll with them.
How difficult is this for your team when you're balancing both UFC 206 here in Toronto, but also the return to Melbourne? You guys have a card November the 27th. That'll have Luke Rockhold against Jacare Souza, and having kind of both balls in the air. I don't think people quite understand the enormity of just having to oversee two distinct parts of the world that are miles and miles apart. Is that a tricky scenario when you have two cards on the go at once, essentially, promotionally?
Well, it is. It taxes the team, but the fact of the matter is we've done it before. Back in 2014, we had an event in Auckland. The middle of June, and 2 weeks later we had one in Vancouver.
Right.
And so we know how to do this, and when you manage 42, 43 events around the world, you've got a great team that knows how to put on terrific shows. We went out. I was in Australia 2-3 weeks ago. We had a terrific on sale. Luke was there. We did some great work in Melbourne and in Sydney, and we're 90% sold out, and it's going to be a fabulous card there. Robbie Whittaker is going to be the co-main. So you're going to have four of the top, I think 6 or 7 middleweights fighting on that card. So it's going to be exciting. And we'll just quickly turn around and come back here and put on a show on December the 10th. So then you watch. Following that, we'll probably have to go on sale with a show in the first quarter of 2017, but that's to come.
Yes. As well, we've got UFC 205 in New York, and I'm sure watching from your standpoint, I don't think you get enough credit for the same battles that you were fighting, not just in Canada, but especially over in Victoria and the cage band. I mean, these are not things that you simply walk in the door and they just throw these off the books. I mean, it's a long, arduous process.
Changing the criminal code here in Canada so that we could take fights into Saskatchewan, we could take fights, continue to have events in British Columbia. Those are the kinds of regulatory challenges that any young sport faces. And I think the best way to put it is that we as an organization have a persistence and have a diligence and have a patience to do the right thing. It's always been a question of when, not if. We felt that way in Saskatchewan and British Columbia and Ontario, 6 years ago. We felt that way in Victoria, where the cage ban is in place, was in place. We feel that way in Western Australia, where it's the same situation as in Perth. And we always felt that way in New York. It just took time. We were persistent, we were diligent, we were professional about it. And good things happen to people that take the time.
Has your philosophy changed at all over the years of coming into places that maybe there was a negative connotation, people not understanding the sport? Because today, I think largely you have a much more, by and large, educated media towards mixed martial arts. But there's also the conclusion I've come to that there's some people that are just, it's not their cup of tea and they're not going to understand that. Has that been something you realized from the get-go or something over time, or have you had different conclusions that you've made in terms of the educational process?
Yeah, John, I think you said it well. I think that it really has changed. It's evolved. When I first started, I spent all my time educating and arguing and trying to put forward the factual basis for why we felt our sports should be regulated, overseen, and embraced. It didn't take me that long. I'd say, can't really put it in actual time period, but I quickly came to the knowledge that there's some people you'll never convince, and that's okay. I would come to the point where I'd say, listen, it's okay if you don't like our sport. All I ask is that if you have an entrenched position, make sure that it's based in fact. Don't come to me and say, Tom, I don't like your sport because there are no rules. And I said, listen, it's okay if you don't like our sport, but the fact of the matter is there are rules. There are tons of rules. There are lots of rules. The rules are there to protect the fighters. The rules are there to ensure there's a level playing field, all those kinds of things. So I've had to spend less time arguing for our sport, less time educating, but you still find pockets. Like I'm still I'm befuddled with sometimes in Perth, in Western Australia, where I'll sit down with seemingly intelligent, well-educated individuals that just don't get it. And like I say, it's okay if you don't like our sport, but at least if you're going to have an entrenched position, do your homework. Maybe speak to a fighter, maybe actually go to an event, maybe watch an event, maybe go to a training facility and see what these athletes do before you become so entrenched.
Final thought, as we are nearing the end of 2016 and we look at the UFC in the state of this country, where would you classify it as? Not just with the UFC, but maybe mixed martial arts as a whole. I know in the province of Ontario, there's still a belief that if you're not the UFC, it's just, you can't make money in this province running fights. What are the next goals within the country of Canada for mixed martial arts as a whole to continue to move forward?
Well, a couple of things. Just touching on the province of Ontario, we haven't given up on that as well. We recognize that in order for the sport to grow and to thrive and to continue at many different levels, there needs to be changes at the athletic commissioner's perspective on how the sport is regulated. I personally met with 6 or 7 different ministers of the portfolio where the Ontario Athletic Commission is housed, and I actually believe that the current sport minister, Minister McMahon from Hamilton, I believe that she will be a place where we can actually get some meaningful changes to the regulations that are in place that are making it difficult for the next level of competition, the next level of promotion to thrive here in this province, because that's the only way the sport continues to grow. There are still cities that we've not been to in this country. There's some provinces we've not been to. We've only been to one Atlantic province, as you know. We've been to Nova Scotia, but there are others that we haven't been to. There's some big cities that we've not been to in the past, and you know what happens when we go to cities for the first time. Look at Ottawa. We set the all-time record for the venue in terms of gross sales at TD Centre, or TD Place in Ottawa. So we've had a lot of milestones, and we've turned over a lot of rocks, and I think we've built a really strong base for the sport. The expression in dog sledding is that the lead dog gets the worst weather. So we're used to having to to push the envelope. We're used to having to be advocates for our sport, to take off our UFC hat and put on our MMA hat, to convince governments and different jurisdictions to think differently. But we're prepared to do that because we know in the end it's going to help our sport. So we've still got work to do, and you know what? We'll continue to do it.
Well, UFC 206 is coming up on Saturday, December the 10th. Tickets are on sale now. It will be headlined by Daniel Cormier defending the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship against Anthony Johnson. And Tom, I want to thank you so much for stopping by. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks, John. Anytime.